Hello again. Walter Rauschenbusch, Christianity and the Social Crisis. His first chapter, The Historical Roots of Christianity, still analyzing the prophets. And this subsection is entitled, The Pessimism of the Prophets. Social preachers nowadays are very commonly charged with being too pessimistic. The same charge was made against the Hebrew prophets. Their people, like ours, was filled full of cheerful and egotistic optimism, with this distinction in favor of the Hebrews that their optimism was based on religious faith, while ours is based mainly on material wealth. Israel had the strongest of all the gods for its champion, and he would surely see his people through all trouble. Was not Israel his dwelling place, and did not his people supply him with the sacrifices which he loved? It is significant that Amos first appeared at a festival at Bethel and interrupted its revels with a jarring note crying that the fall of the northern kingdom and the exile of its people were impending. These prophets continued to be disturbers of religious pleasure. To the people this seemed not only unpatriotic and disagreeable pessimism, but treason and blasphemy combined. For the nation and Jehovah were one, and the downfall of the one implied the downfall of the other. Amos came close to denying that Israel had any special religious prerogative at all. As Amos and Hosea proclaimed the doom of the northern kingdom in the 8th century, Jeremiah proclaimed the fall of the southern kingdom a century and a half later. After the Great Reformation under Josiah, that is around 623 BC, the people were full of confidence. They had the temple, they had the law. Jeremiah called their faith a delusion. Their temple would suffer the same fate as the ancient sanctuary at Shiloh. He denied that Judah was any better than the sister kingdom had been. He ridiculed the optimistic prophets who prophesied the smooth things which the people loved to hear. He set it up as a general principle that the true prophets had always been prophets of disaster. Ezekiel continued the same strain. He had been among the first prominent exiles deported in 597 BC. These men were full of hope for their own speedy return. Those who were left in Jerusalem were also full of confidence because they were now the sifted remnant. As long as Jerusalem was standing, Ezekiel made it his task to batter down and discourage this complacent confidence and to foretell the complete destruction of the national life. How would we feel if a preacher should use a public gathering on Decoration Day or Thanksgiving Day to predict that our country, for its mammonism and oppression, was cast off by God and was to be parceled out to the Mexicans, the Chinese, and the Negroes? In the sense of our security and strength, we should probably simply laugh at him. But suppose that our country was bleeding through disastrous foreign wars and invasions, shaken by internal anarchy, terrified and angry at blows too powerful for us to avert. And in that condition, a preacher should weaken public confidence still further by such a message. The vivid oriental imagery of the prophets must not give us the impression that the injustice and corruption of that day were unique. It is impossible to make accurate comparisons of human misery, but it may well be that the conditions against which the moral sensibility of the prophets revolted could be equaled in any modern industrial center. And the same sins ought to seem blacker 19 centuries after Christ than 8 centuries before Christ. Our prophetic books contain constant reference to the false prophets. They were not the preachers of an idolatrous religion, but men who claimed to deliver the word of Jehovah. Neither were they always conscious liars. They were the mouthpiece of the average popular opinion, and they drew their inspiration from the self-satisfied patriotism, which seemed so very identical with trust in Jehovah and his sanctuary. They were apparently the great majority of the prophetic order. The prophets of our Bible were the exceptional men. The false prophets corresponded to those modern preachers who act as eulogists of existing conditions, not because they desire to deceive the people, but because they are really so charmed with things as they are and have never had a vision from God to shake their illusion. The logic of events proved to be on the side of those great Hebrews. who asserted that black is really black, even if you call it white, and that a wall built with untempered mortar and built out of plumb is likely to topple. Because history backed their predictions, they are now in the Bible and revered as inspired. That's a great point. The majority of the prophets didn't come as claimants of the claims or supporters of the claims of false gods. They came in the name of Jehovah, and therefore the people had to be very discerning to tell the difference between an Hananiah and a Jeremiah. Hananiah, if you look at Jeremiah chapter 28, you've got that contrast of two men who seem to be saying the same thing, except one is saying 70-year exile and one is saying 2. So, yes, the prophets were vindicated by history and by fulfilled prophecy. That's a great point that Rauschenbusch is making here. And also that the majority of preachers are going with the flow. They're going with the status quo. So yes, the true preachers would get the reputation of being pessimists and prophets of disaster. Hence Jeremiah is nicknamed the weeping prophet. More about Jeremiah and the later prophets in Rauschenbusch's next segment. We'll put a link on your screen to Jeremiah versus God's organization. The point that needs to be made if you're a former Jehovah's Witness. Who was the patriot? Was it Jeremiah or God's organization that really stood for Jehovah?